Welcome to the first ever Facebook Live event for Lung Cancer Awareness Month. This event is a joint effort between the National Cancer Institute, or NCI, and lung cancer social media, also known as #LCSM chat. We'll be live on the NCI's Facebook page for 30 minutes from 8 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. At the same time, LCSM chat is conducting its regularly scheduled hour-long tweet chat from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. You can ask questions of myself or my guest on the NCI's Facebook page, and we will do our best to answer those questions during this discussion. Questions we don't answer on air will be answered in the comments soon afterwards. After the Facebook event ends, LCSM chat will continue discussing tools and resources that help lung cancer patients access clinical trials. More information about LCSM chat is available at lcsmchat.com. We're excited to be one of the first groups to use the new Facebook Q&A feature using 2 different feeds. We've worked hard to make sure you'll have excellent audio and video quality, but please realize this is an experiment. I'm Janet Freeman-Daily, and I'm honored to be moderating this discussion. I'm a blogger, science geek, lung cancer patient activist, and co-founder of LCSM Chat. Our topic today is Immunotherapy for Lung Cancer, New Research and Clinical Trials. I'm honored to be working with Dr. Shikun Malik, Head of Thoracic Oncology Therapeutics at the National Cancer Institute. Welcome, Dr. Malik.
Thank you, Janet, and good evening. And I am honored to be here with you to talk to you and my patients about lung cancer and immunotherapy. And please call me Shakun.
Oh, thank you very much, Shikun. So would you please tell us a little bit about your background?
Yes, so I have joined NCI about 4 years ago. Before that, I worked as a clinician mainly at the Lombardi Cancer Center at Georgetown. I led their thoracic oncology clinic where we saw newly diagnosed cancer patients and made a plan for their treatment. In between Georgetown and NCI, I also worked at FDA where it was really an eye-opening experience for me to learn how FDA looks at the approval of drugs. And then at the NCI, although my main work at this time is helping investigators develop clinical trials in lung cancer, I continue to see patients in the clinical center at NCI.
It sounds like you're well prepared for your position. So let's define some terms. What is immunotherapy?
So immunotherapy is a type of treatment that works with your own immune system to help fight cancer cells. So instead of attacking the cancer cells directly, the drugs help your own immune system to fight cancer that it is normally supposed to do.
Okay. And can you please explain the role that immunotherapies are currently playing in lung cancer research and clinical trials?
In lung cancer, the trend of approval for immunotherapies really started last year when FDA approved first immunotherapy agent, nivolumab, for the second-line patients with lung cancer. Now, these are the patients who had already had chemotherapy as a first line, and then when they progressed, the clinical trial showed that nivolumab compared to chemotherapy improved survival. Since then, the field has moved further ahead, and we now have actually 3 more drugs that are approved. And recently, we had a first drug approved, pembro, for patients in first line. This immunotherapy actually showed improvement in overall survival and progression-free survival in patients against chemotherapy. So a lot of exciting things happening in the field of immunotherapy and lung cancer. And there are obviously a number of trials that are also ongoing, looking at maintenance or looking at combinations of immunotherapies with chemotherapies or with other chemotherapies and immunotherapies in this field.
And we have several approved drugs also. Okay. So last year in our Google Hangout, we talked about the LungMap trial for squamous cell lung cancer. Can you explain what this trial is and the role that immunotherapies play in it?
LungMap is a first trial of lung cancer as a personalized therapy that was developed as a master protocol with NCI and in collaboration with pharma, FNIH. It was a first public-private partnership trial that started a couple years ago. And what happened was, at the time, immunotherapies were not approved for lung cancer. So we were doing clinical trial where we were testing patients' tissue, and if they had a genetic abnormality in their tissue, they would go into one of the arms, and we also were testing it against chemotherapy. We did have at that time an immunotherapy arm that was also experimental. So eventually, as you know, that immunotherapy became approved, was an approved therapy, and it improved survival in this second-line lung cancer patients. We actually had to modify the trial, as we did not think that chemotherapy was a good control anymore, since that was not as good as immunotherapy. So now we actually have patients who have never had immunotherapy, that they are tested against nivolumab, which is a standard of care in these patients, against a combination of immunotherapy. We also have single agent drugs that are being tested for genetically abnormal tissue in those lung cancer patients. So so immunotherapy arm has been added. We are also looking forward to another immunotherapy arm that is going to be added in a combination in patients who are going to be refractory to immunotherapy. So we had to modify this clinical trial as the drugs became available and we had more knowledge of what drugs and what immunotherapies work in these patients.
So, trying to simplify this a little, because there's an awful lot of arms, it
Yes.
sounds like now. So the LungMap trial is for patients who have squamous cell lung cancer, and when they decide they want to enter the trial, what happens?
So if they want to decide to enter the trial, if their tissue will be tested for genetic abnormalities. If they have one of the genetic abnormality for which we have a drug that we are testing, they will go into that arm. If they do not, if they have had immunotherapy, we have a clinical trial for them, which is nivolumab versus a combination of nivolumab with another immunotherapy. Now we are going to be in very near future opening another trial, which is for the patients who have also had immunotherapy and they have now become refractory to that. So we have a combination of immunotherapy. So we're going to have at least 2 different trials amongst these arms in LungMap, where patients will be able to go on immunotherapy, but if they have genetic abnormality, they can go into one of the arms that we have drug for. Trying to have a lot of choices.
So for squamous cell patients, this actually simplifies things. They don't have to look at all of the different trials that might be out there. They can be within one trial, but go to the arm that seems to have the best chance of being appropriate for them.
If they are eligible for, as you know, there could be other trials, but if this gives them an option that this trial they may be eligible for one of the arms or an immunotherapy arm, and it gives them a broader choice of not have to go from one trial to the other, and maybe be able to be eligible. Of course, one has to see whether these patients meet all the eligibility criteria, and if we have a drug for their genetic abnormality, and if they will be eligible for immunotherapy, they can go on immunotherapy.
Okay, so these patients previously would be on one of these targeted therapies, or they would be on chemo, and now many of them have the option to go on immunotherapy. Let's talk a little bit about the side effects that patients experience for immunotherapy. How are those different than the side effects they might see for chemo?
So chemotherapy, works on all growing cells, so that's why we have a different kind of toxicities with chemotherapies, where the blood cells will drop in numbers, patients got infections and sepsis, and it did not differentiate between normal cell and abnormal cell. Luckily, chemotherapy has killed the abnormal cells more, so that's how we treated lung cancer or any kind of cancer. But immunotherapies, although are less toxic, but let me just take a pause, but they also have toxicities, and these toxicities are less intense than some of the chemotherapy toxicities, but they can also be annoying, or they can be intense, or they can be serious. So the more common toxicities are related to immune, like patients may have any liver toxicities, they can have lung toxicities, but in general these are thought to be different and milder than chemotherapy.
Okay. So in lung cancer, most of the immunotherapies that we have available target individual proteins, the PD-L1 or PD-1. But there are other types of immunotherapies that are coming down the pike. Can you talk a little bit about those? There's vaccines.
Yes. There are vaccines, there are combination therapies, so they are all in early development at this time, and there is a combination of immunotherapies that not only work on PD-1 or PD-L1, they work on CTLA-4 and other immune checkpoints, but they are early in the development. Right now, what is approved for lung cancer are PD-1 and PD-L1 drugs, anti-PD-L.
Okay. So there are others coming also, which is great. Okay. Another clinical trial we talked about last year was the Alchemist clinical trial. Is there anything new there?
So similar changes we had to make for a lung map. We had to also make modifications of Alchemist in the Alchemist trial. So what Alchemist is a trial for early stage lung cancer patients. These are the patients who have stage 1 to 3A lung cancer that has been completely removed, and so then they will get a standard of care, which is usually chemotherapy, and after that patients still had a 50% chance of relapse. So what Alchemist was doing was testing patients' tissue, and if they had EGFR, they would go on erlotinib for 2 years, and if they had ALK mutations, they would go on crizotinib for 2 years to test if addition of targeted therapies improved survival in these patients beyond what we got with chemotherapy. So when immunotherapies got approved, we again had to modify this trial, because now we knew that immunotherapies in metastatic setting also help patients with lung cancer. So there were two changes we had to consider for Alchemist that happened. One was that Alchemist was only for patients with non-squamous cell histology, because as you know that EGFR and ALK mutations are in non-squamous histology. On the other hand, immunotherapies don't only work with non-squamous, it also works in squamous cell histology. So we had to add another cohort of lung cancer patients that had squamous cell histology as well. And we also have now a trial added, which is immunotherapy with nivolumab after they have had standard of care after surgery, and versus observation. So again, in this study we will test whether addition of immunotherapy after chemotherapy will improve survival in these patients.
Okay. Can you please explain the role of genetic testing in screening and qualifying for these clinical trials? We've talked about identifying which drug might match a particular patient's lung cancer. So what sort of things are you talking about screening for, and how do they do that?
It depends on the clinical trial. For example, it also will depend on what kind of clinical trial or the drug in that arm is open at the. For example, I'm talking about lung map. So we have arms. One of the things that we are able to do in these master protocols is, depending on as we added immunotherapies, we can also subtract the drugs that don't work. So if we have a target that we are trying to block by a drug, and if we see after a certain number of patients it doesn't work, we can close that arm. So it will really depend at the time when a patient is newly diagnosed and then develops progression. They can have their genetic testing done even at that time, and at the time of progression can right away go into the lung map trial. If their genetic for their genetic abnormality, we have an arm ongoing at that time. Similarly for Alchemist, again for Alchemist we are only testing two genetic abnormalities, which is ALK translocation and EGFR, and if they are negative for that, then they will be tested for PD-L1, and they will go on PD-L1 or nivolumab trial. Now for nivolumab trial you don't have to be PD-L1 positive. This is for both PD-L1 positive and negative, since we don't know at this time who are the best people who are benefited by this drug. We know that the people who are PD-L1 positive benefit more, but we also have seen that they can benefit to some extent PD-L1 negative. So both types of people, both PD-L1 positive as well as negative, can go on Alchemist.
Okay. So if people are interested in these trials, the trial pays for the testing if they meet other criteria?
Right. If they meet all the other criteria, the trial will be paid by the NCI for screening.
Okay. So we've been talking about clinical trial options for patients that have particular targets. We've talked about immunotherapy. Are there any efforts looking into whether or not patients who have EGFR, ALK, or ROS1 benefit from combining their targeted therapy with an immunotherapy?
There are some trials that are looking at this at the moment, but as you know, that is something that we need to start with the smaller pilot trials, and if we do have a preclinical and clinical benefit, then it can go into large randomized trials. There is a ALK plus immunotherapy trial ongoing at the moment.
We've been using the terms PD-1 and PD-L1, but we haven't really defined what those are. Could you talk a little bit more about the PD-1 blockade, what that's about?
So this is these are the enzymes that are proteins that are found in tumor tissue, and so these, if they are the ones, if you block them, then the cancer cells die. So that's why they are called PD-L1 and PDL, and so these are expressions of the protein in the tumor cells. And patients can be positive or negative in their tissue, so we can test this on the tumor tissue.
So the PD-1, as I understand it, is a protein that's on the white cell, which is part of the immune system, and PD-L1 is on the tumor cell.
On tumor cells, yes.
But not necessarily.
But not necessarily, correct.
Okay. Okay. So there are other types of immunotherapies also. One of the things that, a question that's come in is about adoptive transfer of T cells. Could you talk a little bit about what that is?
Right. So you can have adoption of the T cells where you can transfer the immune cells, and that can blocking them can help cancer cells. So those are all the things that are being tested at this time, but we don't have drugs that have been either approved or have been tested in the big clinical trials at this time.
There are some clinical
Right,
trials that are
correct.
looking at it, though. Right. Okay. All right. Let's see another question. So, are there other types of immunotherapies that I'm getting a question, like cancer vaccines? Can you talk a little bit about how those work?
So again, cancer vaccines are that you try to you give the vaccines and again make your own immune system fight cancer. So there have been vaccines have been tested many years ago, and so far there has not been a positive clinical trial that has led to an FDA approval of these vaccines for lung cancer. But that doesn't mean that won't happen in future, and that doesn't mean that we are not going to be able to refine these vaccines and be able to help in future. But we'll see how the field goes.
Okay. Some patients with other cancers like melanoma have had long-term response to immunotherapies. Are we seeing that in lung cancer also?
Yes. So this is an interesting question that we are looking at. So what happens is that most of these patients may not even though they benefit and have overall survival. But when you look at these survival curves, there you're going to always have a tail end, which means that at the end of the curve, there is going to be a number of patients that continue to live long. And so a lot of research at this time is being done, and who are these patients? I mean, as you and I talked, that these patients could be who have PD-L1 expression, but that's not the whole story, because we know that it works better in this, but there is something about those patients that where PD-L1 not only PD-L1, there may be something in their system or body why these patients live longer than most of the patients. What we call, we have a clinical trial that we're looking at these patients called exceptional responders. Why do they exceptionally do well? So that is a lot of interest by NCI and other investigators to look at those patients, look at their genomics, look at their tumor tissue to see why are these patients responding and why are they doing better than other patients. And that you see a lot in immunotherapy. You see a lot in other targeted therapies as well, but immunotherapy, it's much more pronounced that you see that big tail end.
Okay, so we've talked a bit about clinical trials. Are these clinical trials we're talking about only for patients with advanced cancer? And if a patient is interested in a clinical trial, how do they find them if their doctor is not able to help them find it?
Clinical trials are not only for advanced patients. As we just talked, Alchemist is for patients who have early stage lung cancer, and LungMap on the other hand is for patients who have advanced stage lung cancer. There are some trials that are ongoing in even earlier stage where we are testing whether immunotherapy in neoadjuvant setting, which means even before they have had surgery, whether that makes a difference in these patients. Again, smaller studies are just being started, and it will take us few more years to have an answer to that. So it can be for any early stage or late stage patients. We also are going to be having a trial started for maintenance. That patient has advanced stage, then they respond to chemotherapy or immunotherapy, and then how long can we treat them with these drugs and maintain them. So it can be on any lung cancer patient. It is a matter of finding the right trial. Now the question is, how do patients find these clinical trials? So one of the ways we are at NCI looking at making the navigation for patients easier so that we can help them. They can try to check at trials.cancer.gov. That will help them, or they can call our cancer helpline, and their physician as well can help them find the clinical trials.
And we will be also discussing more resources and ways to find clinical trials on the hashtag LCSM chat on Twitter at the same time.
And
so
I thought,
go
okay,
ahead.
yes, so that you will give them that resource as well. Yeah.
Yes. So we just have a little bit of time. I want to ask quickly, how can people access clinical trials if they don't live near a major academic cancer center?
Janet, you'll be surprised to know that 60% of our sites for both LungMap and Alchemist are in community-based sites. So,
that's good to know.
I you know, it will be hard for me to say, you know, if patient lives very far from academic center, that they you know, how far that community-based center will be, but it will be much easier for them to find if they can go on the trials.cancer.gov or talk to their physician and find out where can they get on these clinical trials. And again, I'm very happy to say that more than 60% of our sites are in community-based centers.
Okay, we have another question that came in from the audience. Can patients on immunotherapies initially see their cancer progress, or might patients on immunotherapies take a longer time to see a response than possibly on other treatments?
That's a very good question, and excellent question actually. Yes. We are seeing that much less happen with these immunotherapies, but it can happen. So it takes, when an immunotherapy is given or these drugs are given, sometimes in the beginning when we didn't know about this phenomena called pseudoprogression, the patient's tumor may show that it is bigger, but it is usually what we have noted is that it is from all these immune cells coming around the tumor and trying to, you know, go around it, and then eventually it will calm down, and then it will start shrinking. And also sometimes these tumors may stay same size, and you know, we may be concerned, oh, it's not shrinking, but then you see that these patients will live a long time with just the same size in the tumor. So the doctors know this phenomena, and again, it was much more seen pronounced with another type of immunotherapies called CTLA-4 cells, but we do see sometimes with these immunotherapies also, and then we just follow these patients and do another scan in a few weeks, and feel better when these tumors start shrinking and they start patients continue to do well.
Okay. Well, we're approaching the end of our Facebook Live time. So when this event ends, please join us in the ongoing lung cancer social media chat, which will be discussing tools and resources to help patients access lung cancer clinical trials. To participate, just search Twitter for the hashtag LCSM and include the hashtag LCSM in all your tweets. If we have any questions that were posted that we didn't get to, answers will continue to be posted in the comments section on the NCI's Facebook page. You can see a recording of this video soon on the NCI's website and YouTube pages. So we have just a minute or two longer. Do you have something you'd like to say in closing, Dr. Malik? Shukun?
Thank you, Janet, and I thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk with you today. And
I appreciate your...
Thank you.
Go ahead.
And if you have any questions or patients have any questions, please feel free to send us questions, and I'll be more than happy to respond to those questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Shafun, for joining me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. I appreciate your willingness to share information with patients. So we are closing out this Facebook Live event for Lung Cancer Awareness Month. This is Janet Freeman-Daily and...
This is Shakun Malik from NCI. Thank you.
Yeah, signing
Thank you.
off. Thank you.